Open our bay doors.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What would you do with a brain if you had one?
Do? Why, if I had a brain, I could...
Miles per hour.
I could while away...
46.56 degrees.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Zach. Perhaps you can explain scene by scene that entire film. It's only 3 hours. I've seen it once here tonight with the rest of you. It's an epic, very stunning film. I wish we had more time and it weren't 10:30 at night. However, there's a lot to say about it, and one way to start is to think about the film as a religious document, which is something I talk about. That's the poster for the film the first time. I mentioned cognitive disciplines because, in a sense, the film is about thinking, also about cinema, which is visual. Thinking that is based on language requires categories. Categories require one to make somewhat arbitrary decisions which, once made, become mandatory. Humans love dualistic categories. They define conceptual space. For example, love and hate, or in the movie, human and Shern. This guy, Marvin Minsky, very pleasant man, a professor obviously, wrote a book called The Society of Mind. In it, he talks about dumbbell theories. Now, he's being sardonic, but it's a clever idea. Here are some of the major notions that human beings carry around with them most of the time in most cultures. We define conceptual space by these extremes. For example, physical versus mental, acquired versus innate, cause versus chance, true, false, child, adult, alive, dead, or in many cultures, true faith, false faith, false faith. In our culture, white and black. We could add male and female, smart, not smart. Important concepts like human, time, and life are paired with their opposites. Human versus God. One of the great themes of this film is precisely who is a God, who is not. The film is Polish Catholic. It isn't accidental that the last great scene is one of crucifixion of the man, God, who came from outer space. Time versus timelessness. The movie has a movie within the movie. It spans centuries of time. It also spans old Earth and new Earth. It's science fiction, but it's also Shakespearean. Life versus death. Once these pairs enter into public reflection, myths, religions, philosophy, movies, problems and puzzles emerge. For example, as you see in the film, there are these constant monologues that are right out of Hamlet. Who am I? What is a man? What is a human being? What is a beast? Is there a beast inside of me? Am I mortal or immortal? Is ethics simply acquired or is it within? Is the animal distinct from the human being? Can human beings slaughter animals at will, or is that something animal inside of us? Once life emerged, why did death persist? We know scientifically once there was no life, then there was life. But then why did death occur? Why do all living things eat other living things? When did time begin? When will it end? How do timelessness and deathless beings, the gods or God, pertain to us, human beings? Where did we come from? Where are we going? The great concept in this film is these proto-human beings literally discover that there are outer beings from outer space who come and populate a new world and who talk about this fantastic place called Earth. Where did we come from? Where are we going? Because all cultural categories are somewhat arbitrary, their boundaries must be defended. Myth tells us why Rituals tell us how. The last part of the film is all about the ad hoc rituals that the humans, all descended from the two Adams and Eve, create amongst themselves that replicate human, earthly religions. This is the science part. It won't last long. All natural systems, stars, tides, and spaceships, obey the law of entropy. You all know that as the second law of thermodynamics. Cultural systems confront that law. They are negentropic, Vanderbilt word, warning. Negentropic means the work of culture to resist entropy. This very building is negentropic. Creating culture, creating films is negentropic. By the way, it's not surprising these Soviet puppets didn't like this film. There's way too much about human thought and freedom in this, and I can see why they suppressed it. Negentropic systems require energy. This guy, Nicholas Carnot, is a very young man, formulated the first instance of the law of entropy. In a closed system, entropy always increases over time. Hence, there is no perpetual motion, machines, and time goes one way. Authors happily break this law. For example, Stewie's time machine in Family Guy. There are hundreds of more. I think there are 10 TV shows right now about time travel. At least they're advertised all the time. Going back and forth in time is a staple of serious sci-fi literature, movies, and TV shows. Science fiction recognizes scientific laws, but its stories transcend them. In some cultures, myth and rituals address conceptual puzzles. In ours, science fiction uses technical ideas to set up what-if stories. This is what the movie does so well. The conceit is that Earth astronauts leave and they replicate all of our human misery in another world, in another way. So on the Silver Globe, and this, Zach, surely will help us, what are its conceptual puzzles? Here are 3. The rise of religion and the origins of God. So where did it all come from? The movie was made in the 70s when most Poles were not Catholic. Officially, as you all know, Soviet dogma requires you stamp out religions. The endless agony in the film about what is ethical action and what is it grounded comes from that Polish experience of the destruction of the church, as was true, of course, in the Soviet Union. Who is a true Messiah and who is a false Messiah? And what is the penalty for being a false Messiah? As I see the film, at the end, Marek has to pay the penalty because when he comes back washed of the ritual dreck, the mud, and clean again, he threatens the very priesthood he had coexisted with, and that's why he has to be destroyed. The obvious parallel would be Jesus, of course, and others. Thank you.
All right. So do you mind if we open it up for some questions, some thoughts from the audience and stuff? Sure. All right. We won't take forever doing this, but there's a whole lot here for us to think about, to talk about, and we've got a professional with us. So anyone who has any thoughts, questions, input, raise your hand. I'll bring the mic to you. Oh, way back in the back there. Making me work for it.
So I've seen the film a few times, but the thing that I noticed this time around that I really enjoy is that, because it kind of takes multiple sittings, which everyone here has defied tonight, but when the initial idea of finding the ocean, finding the sea, and sort of rejoicing over finding the sea, finding this beach, it's sort of presented as this comforting idea, but then it also becomes the site of all these rituals. It becomes this site, and I was thinking about it in this, this time around, that it is actually that boundary that is exactly sort of that negentropic concept that you're kind of referring to is it almost provides this idea of comfort of a place where they go out to the sea and then it stops, and then obviously all these doubts kind of proliferate from there. And I wonder, like, what you see in the symbolism of all of these things taking place on this beach, sort of is that is that a sign of that, or what do you think there?
That's an awfully good question. Were you a religious studies major?
No. I was a nothing studies major.
Well, that's similar. It's an astute question because you said it perfectly. The beach is the boundary between water and land. Water and land are classic dichotomous pairs. They are precisely what Minsky would call a dumbbell pairing. And in most ritual processes, there is a liminal moment where one goes between one state and another state. That liminus is literally the threshold. The liminus in a temple or a house is sacred. For example, among Jews, most portals to a home have a ritual object that tells you this is you're entering a home, a sacred space. Every temple has a ritual for going in and going out. And I like your point about the water. The water is also cleansing. The other part of that is beyond the water is the land of the Shern, and that is dangerous. This is also, of course, Western history. When Europeans populated the New World, the slaughter we saw here took place all the time. The dehumanizing sense that people who are other than us, humanoids who are different from us, are full of venom and impurity is human projection. Excellent question.
Yeah. Hey. I'll come back to you next.
This is more maybe a follow-up thought to that than a question, but maybe you can speak to it. But I thought there's a lot of theatricality, like when you said Shakespearean, and like the way they're fighting is like very not realistic in those moments, and that seems to grow as the film goes on and as time passes forward. And like the early scenes with the guy on the horse at the beginning, like in those scenes, and when he goes in, it almost has like a Kubrickian realism. It feels so real and powerful, and as it goes on, it seems more like a show, the whole movie, and you become more removed. And I think setting those scenes on the beach, the beach is the stage. That's how I saw that. I don't know. So I guess my question, if you had thoughts on, because clearly in other ways he goes to great lengths to achieve like realism with the budget and stuff.
Yeah, yes.
And but not in those instances.
It's another nice question. You're doing really well for 10:40 at night, I must say. A stage now, like this stage, is broadly entertainment. But as you know, the history of Western theater is the history of ritual. Theater, Greek theater particularly, and Roman theater, comes out of temples and ritual, which is why we are here. This would be a temple in many senses. We have a golden arch. That seems a different golden arch over us right here.
There's some angels above you too, if you look at the very top of the proscenium there.
I didn't know everyone could see them. The temple stage is precisely another liminal point in Western history where in the 8th century you have basically priests. In the 5th century in Athens you have playwrights. Well, a great movie like this one is more than entertainment. It's also slightly boring in as much as you have to actually work. It's not entertaining in the way that blockbusters are, where in a way you go and leave your mind behind and things come at you and there's a lot of speed and music and super fast action, lightning fast action, really unbelievable action, which I like. But this is different. I agree. There's something very moving about the pace of this 3-hour ritual of sitting, watching. It's kabuki. It's simulated action. The Shern are fascinating persons in costumes, but there's also something quite dreadful about them. The shifting back and forth of the characters is very compelling, but not entertaining, which is more like most ritual. It's not the same thing as going to a show.
Do you have a question?
I think it's interesting to look at the film that Zulawski made right after he completed this one, which is called Mes nuits sont plus belles que vos jours, which is My Nights Are More Beautiful Than Your Days. He made that in 1989, 2 years after he completed this, and that film also has a beach climax where the beach is a very potent metaphor for a transcendent state. In that movie, the protagonist has got a brain disease, which is making him slowly lose his memory until he'll have no memory of anything he's ever done. And he decides at the end of the film to go out into the water at the beach and just kill himself rather than live with no memory of anything at all. And the girl that becomes involved with him, she decides to, because she's become so involved with him, she decides that she would rather accept oblivion with him than go on living without him. So it's got like a double suicide climax, but again, they're both drawn to the beach for this thing, and it's sort of interesting that he did that film right after finishing this one, so obviously he was not through with using the beach when he finished this film.
No, and notice that film doesn't sound like it's going to get $100 million box office either. This has more quality of what I grew up with in the 70s, 60s and 70s of European art films, Bergman films, which have a similar speed and slowness, usually black and white, very calm, very introspective, and they are events where actually you can be changed. Sometimes a movie like this or this one changes you. That's not entertainment. That's something else, and it's closer to ritual process that has always been part of real art, real theater.
Well, Zulawski never really courted the box office in his entire career. The only time he had a film that was even modestly successful, like Possession, it was strictly an accident. He certainly didn't plan it to be a successful film at the box office. He pretty much made what he wanted to make and was completely oblivious to whether they would have any market success whatsoever.
Yes, exactly. An artist.
All right, we got one up here.
Thank you. So we heard a little bit about the situation on the production of the film, how it was incomplete, and then a decade later went through this process of Zulawski kind of tying together the loose pieces and sort of a kludgy, imperfect sort of way. But one thing that that process did do was not only have the director's own narration, but he inserted himself and an image of himself, I can only presume, into the finale of the film and made the artifice of its creation very obvious. So I guess my question would be how that literalness of the director's role in the creation of the film might relate to the themes of who is a god in the terms of how any author or creator is sort of the creator of their own world, the god of this creation, and this director had the vision and created everything that we saw, and that he is putting himself physically and very obviously into that. And so how sort of the accident of the history of the production of the film may have tied into some of the themes.
It's another subtle point, and I like that very much. The serendipity of that, I thought that was fascinating. I like that. It was also helpful to hear straightforward narration for 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Just enough to kind of get grounded one more time. I haven't seen the film more than once, but the relief maybe with that was charming. I also like the fact that he's in the film because it is a film, it is an artistic moment. And in my experience, that makes better art usually. If you look at true blockbuster films with 300 people doing the sound or something, they seem so polished, they seem so brilliantly faceted that I never want to see them again. I can't imagine seeing them again because I've got it. It's like whipped cream or something. It's just there, it's delicious, but you don't want a gallon of whipped cream. This is different. My experience with the artists, I'm also a psychoanalyst, so I work with artists and writers and poets and musicians, and there I think you find, with the artists I know, their best work has this duality about it. There's a lot of thought and there's just a lot of discovery. It's back and forth. The instrument says something, the film says something, the song, the music, the timbre of the instrument says something in response to their expectations. So they're not masters. They don't actually dominate the art. There is much more reciprocity. It's more of a dance. It's more of a dyad.
All right, any last comments or anything? Oh, yeah.
The last person was talking about the artifice of the ending where Zulawski allows himself to be photographed. And this is actually a pattern that he's done in at least 3 films where he reveals that it's only a movie. In fact, the film that he did after after this film was shut down in the 70s, the next film he was able to complete was called La Femme Publique, and that one takes the ending of this movie one step more. Instead of just showing the director facing the camera, it shows the director surrounded by his entire film crew facing the camera, and they all bow to the camera to signal the movie's over. And then in Zulawski's final film that was released about just shortly before his death last year, Cosmos, that film ends with an ending that shocked a lot of people. It ends in sort of Smokey and the Bandit style with a whole series of movie bloopers just to show you that it was just a movie and shows all the actors messing up their takes and shows different things, which is almost unheard of for a European artistic film to end that way. So,
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, guys.